So then, good evening. Good evening. So for the oral transmission of Maitreya's mantra, first to give some background information. Then, as you all know, have heard that Maitreya is the future Buddha, the fifth Buddha of this eon. And yesterday, as with the story of Je Tsongkhapa and his meeting with one of his principal gurus, Lhoda Dubchen, then after meeting, after their meeting, Je Rinpoche sees when they meet for the first time, then Je Rinpoche sees Lhoda Dubchen in the form of Vajrapani, and Lhoda Dubchen sees Je Rinpoche in the form of Manjushri. And that evening, then Lhoda Dubchen gives his first teaching to Je Rinpoche. So this was, a Vajrapani initiation, a Vajrapani empowerment. And then the next dawn, then Lhoda Dubchen has this vision, and he gives this teaching, and during that, then he has these visions of Maitreya, of Manjushri, and also Saraswati. So there seems to be a very close connection between Je Rinpoche and Maitreya. One of the, what we call the four great deeds of Je Rinpoche, then one of those deeds is when Je Rinpoche visits this place called Zingchi, and in that place there's this very old statue of Maitreya that has been neglected for quite some time, and then Je Rinpoche comes and renovates the temple, renovates the statue, and then consecrates, and then offers many prayers, right? So this is considered one of Je Rinpoche's deeds. And then one of Je Tsongkhapa's other deeds is hosting of the Melam Chenmo, hosting of the Great Prayer Festival in Lhasa at the Chogang, this temple, the Chogang, houses one of the most oldest of the statues. It's very historical. It houses this Shakyamuni Buddha statue. So here then Je Rinpoche hosts this great prayer festival, and at the end, and this Melam great prayer festival, it is held in celebrating the Buddha's act of miracle. When Buddha performed the miracles, so the Buddha performed these miracles when the six Indian ascetics, they challenged him to perform miracles, right? So it is said that from the earlier teachings that the Buddha performed, I think, 2 miracles. One was in one miracle that he performed, then from his upper body there was fire coming out, but from the lower part there was water coming out, right? This was the first miracle, and in the second miracle, then the Buddha created replicas of himself, and then this filled the sky, right? So 2 miracles, and then in the Mahayana teachings, sutras, and so forth, then it is explained that in those retellings, then the Buddha went on to perform many more miracles for multiple days. So the Myelam festival was hosted in part to celebrate those feats of miracles, and then this prayer festival culminates with the procession of the Maitreya statue, and then in the 4 cardinal directions, then ablution rites are offered, and so forth. So then it is clear that Je Rinpoche had this connection with Maitreya. So by establishing a connection with Maitreya, then we are planting karmic seeds, and also in a way making it possible to ripen whatever seeds that we may have planted previously to take rebirth and to be there during Maitreya's time, even though that is not near. Different sources, there are different sources. Some sources say that it will be in, I think, 4.9 billion years. Others say 5.6 billion years. But nevertheless, it seems between these 2 sources, these different estimates, there is a couple of million years between those sources, right? So minimum it's 4.9 billion years away. So we are still, there's still some years have to pass before we can actually be there during Maitreya's time. So that is one thing. And then, as you know, we have the 2 lineages, the profound lineage and the vast lineage. The profound lineage through Manjushri and then Acharya Nagarjuna and so forth, and the vast lineage through Maitreya and Asanga and so forth. So then it is clear that Maitreya holds the vast lineage, and the lineage passed through Maitreya has this emphasis on the method aspect, of the path. So naturally, then this would include cultivating compassion, cultivating loving kindness, and then generating the awakening mind, bodhicitta. So from that aspect, I think taking on Maitreya as one's meditational deity, I think has this benefit of developing warm-heartedness, developing the altruistic mind. So in this way, then I think we can make the practice of, Maitreya relevant. The cultivation of loving kindness and compassion is the essence of the Buddha's teachings. For example, when we take the 5 precepts, when we take the Pratimoksha vows, then this precept of not killing is very important. We, as Buddhists, emphasize this, right? Not killing others. Because not killing others, why do we have to refrain from killing others? Is that has to do with compassion. If compassion was not so important, then refraining from the act of killing wouldn't be so relevant, right? So it shows that that compassion is something like the essence, of the Buddha Dharma, of the Dharma that the Buddha taught. The Dharma is based on cultivating compassion, cultivating loving kindness, and cultivating the altruistic mind. Okay, so the practice of compassion. Now, how do we apply the practice of compassion in our daily lives, right? How do we do this? And especially in the context of, let us say, if we are working in a workplace where there is a strong competition, where between the co-workers there are these rivalries for coveted positions and so forth, and where without resorting to backstabbing others, that you will not receive promotions and so forth, like this, in this kind of a situation, then how do we practice compassion, right? How do we do this? I think in this type of situations, then it is important that even though to really assess the situation, to assess the working environment, I think this is important to first assess the working environment, and then asking yourself, asking oneself whether is it truly necessary for one to engage in negative actions in order to work there. This is one question that we have to ask ourselves if we find in a similar situation. It could be in the office environment, or it could be at the in a factory, or in any other environment where we have to work for a living. Of course, in a place where there is lots of competition, and where one has to, where people around you are engaging in something like the tricks of the trade, that kind of thing, in order to gain an unfair advantage over the others, right? Over others. So if you find yourself in such a situation, then it is important to not be naive of these tactics that the co-workers might use. But having said that, then one has to ask oneself whether one has to act likewise, in order to stay in that position. So this you can ask, and you can check whether it is necessary, whether it is absolutely necessary or not. So this is one thing. And then on the other hand, we might find ourselves working in a place where we don't face these problems, But then, with the organization or the entity, the place that we work for, there might arise some doubts whether you may be contributing to harmful actions, in an indirect way, right? So this could be one situation. And here again, in the eightfold noble path, then there is one, the right livelihood, the right livelihood. And the right livelihood, it doesn't have to do so much with whether one is indirectly causing a harm or not. This is not so important, but it has to do more with your motivation, with your motivation. So if the motivation is good, but somehow indirectly by being an employee for this place, which may indirectly cause harm to the environment, which in turn then causes harm to the inhabitants that are part of that environment and so forth, we are in a way, then indirectly causing harmful actions onto other living beings, right? But the most important thing here is, as long as your conscience is clear, as long as your motivation is, you are not motivated in harming others, then I think this is fine. One does not need to have doubts, because we have to draw the line at some point, right? If we bring in this aspect of indirectly causing harm towards others, then it might be very difficult to find any living, any livelihood, right? So then one has to think more about one's intentions, right? And as long as the intention from your side is virtuous and there are no unethical motivations, then I think this is good. This is good. One does not need to have doubts in this way. And then bringing compassion and loving kindness in our human-to-human relationships. Again, I think this is so important. Many times, if we are not careful, and if we simply recite the verse on, for example, the verse on refuge and generating bodhicitta, and also the four immeasurables, if we simply just recite them without really thinking on the meaning, then there is the risk that these verses, they may become somewhat dry. They may lose the meaning. We may lose our touch with the meaning of these verses, these aspirational verses. So in our relationship with our family, with our friends and co-workers and so forth and so on, then it is really important to always to concentrate on, I think, something like the common ground, on the common ground. Because when we have this kind of arguments, then this arises when our point of views, when our viewpoints, when they diverge, when they differ, then disagreements may arise, right? So then, when this has happened, then it is important that we concentrate, we focus more on the common ground, that so that, and also, as someone who aspires on the Mahayana path, who aspires the qualities of the Buddha, then what is very important, I feel, is that, right now, if you don't think about it, then we have this tendency to view ourselves as being entirely right. My view is 100% correct. We have this view. It is part of our mental predisposition, our mental disposition. We always come from that place, right? We always have this view. So this is something that we really have to think about. When if there are some little problems we see in our relationship with a particular person, then rather than wait for the other person to take the initiative, then as a Buddhist, then I think we have this responsibility to take the initiative ourselves, And we first have to do that by thinking that it is possible that I may also have some faults, right? That there might be some errors in my viewing of the other person. There might be some errors in how I relate to the other person. This is, I think, very important. If we want to mend our kind of broken relationships with fellow human beings, then this is very important. This is so important. So, here, if you are familiar with the two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth. So, what we can learn from these two truths is that there is a perceptual reality, and then there is an ultimate reality. Likewise, there is, and in a way, if we apply the two truths to our view, then there is the truth as we see it, and then there is the truth that is beyond our perception, right? So with this, if we can accept this, then it helps us in seeing that what we perceive may not be entirely true. What we hold on as the truth may not be entirely true. So this is, I think, it would be useful, it would be beneficial if we can learn this from the teachings of Two Truth and then apply it in how we relate with others. So when it comes to disagreements, then we can, I think like this. We can think like this. And now, for example, if a person says hurtful words to us, then how should one react? Obviously, our natural tendency is that we would react in a negative way. We would become angry. This is perfectly natural, right? It is perfectly natural. The anger, that instantaneous anger, is not, I don't think, is such a big problem. The bigger problem is holding on to that anger, holding on to the anger, holding on to the hurt, this is more damaging, right? So if you think about it, initially those hurtful words only can go so much. They can only go so far in causing disturbances in our mind. Once we have become angry, then from then on, then it's really in our hands. Whether we want to keep on holding on to that anger, that hurt, or we simply forgive the other people, forgive the other, right? This seems to me, it seems that this is really, it is entirely in our hands. When we have anger issues, then if we simply suppress our anger, then this isn't good either, right? If we just suppress our anger, then this is not helpful, it's not healthy. We have to first know the pitfalls or the shortcomings of anger, right? Of voluntarily holding on to anger. Yeah, we have to know how damaging that is to our well-being, mentally, our mental well-being as well as our physical well-being. It's very damaging. And why am I talking about these situations about dealing with anger? Because anger is what kills compassion, right? If compassion is really is such an important part of our practice, of our Mahayana practice, then we really have to learn how to deal with anger, how to handle anger, how to process anger, how to process aversion. This is, I think, very important. If we do not prepare ourselves in dealing with these destructive emotions, then this will inhibit our practice, our spiritual practice, right? This will inhibit in developing unconditional compassion for others. Clearly this will inhibit, right? This will obstruct that. So then, that is not what we want, right? If we really want to make it a point to practice bodhicitta, to truly aspire for Buddhahood, then it is important that we have to prepare ourselves in handling these everyday situations. This is very important. Sometimes I feel this kind of practical things, these kind of practical things, how to handle these kind of situations, secular situations that everyone experiences. These are often overlooked, right? We simply say, compassion, compassion, bodhicitta, bodhicitta, right? But then, how do we deal with situations, with our mental, with our emotions, which directly oppose, they oppose the development of compassion, the development of bodhicitta, right? So this is very important that we have to learn to process, learn how to process anger, how to process attachment and ignorance. But anger, as we say, out of all the destructive emotions, there is no destructive emotion that is damaging as aversion, right? So then this is something that we have to think about, from time to time, how to learn to control anger and then to direct anger towards the path, not simply suppress our anger, but learn to divert our anger onto the path to enlightenment. So this is something I just wanted to share and remind us of that, yeah. And in relationships with our fellow human beings, it requires us to be skillful. It requires one to be skillful in upholding a healthy relationship. This is important because if you have a very good relationship with the other person, but if you overdo the good, if you overdo it, then there is the risk that it could turn out sour, right? One of the eminent Tibetan writers has said, is an eminent master, the Sakya Pandita, in one of his treatises states that if you are too kind, if you are over caring, then this could damage the relationship, right? So one has to maintain the right amount of a good relationship. In other words, to not fall into the extremes, So if one can maintain this balance, some kind of, impartiality in the relationship, then this relationship can last a long time, on good terms, right? Because sometimes if you're not careful, when things are going good, when things seems to go our way, if we are not mindful, then sometimes we can become emotional, we can become emotional. And if we become too emotional, then there is a danger that we may lose sight, foresight. We may lose our foresight, we may lose our sort of like the unbiased mind. We become too biased, right? And if we are too biased to a person, then this is not good. If we are overly biased to a person, then this can cause problems. So like this, then one has to be skillful in upholding healthy relationships with others. And then also, differentiating between the person and the person's actions, differentiating between the person and the person's negative actions or the person's harmful actions. Again, this is one point that one needs to one needs to be reminded of, right? If you're not careful, then simply if we just let our instincts take control, then when we are put in a unfavorable situation, then we might react to the person who has who made us feel uncomfortable, etc. Then we might see the person in a very negative way, right? To the point that we end up viewing the person as almost like symbolizing negativeness, as a personification of hatred, So again, we have to be careful there and then differentiate between that person and the harmful action the person had committed in relation to us. So we have to differentiate like that, and then we can do this analysis, right? So if think about that particular harmful action that the person has committed towards us. Now think, why am I using this as a reason to hold on to the anger? Why am I using this harmful action to justify my negative reaction, and not only reaction, but holding on to anger towards the other, right? Can I use that as a way to justify? One has to think, okay, it is true that those harmful words may have led us to react in an angry manner, but the holding of that, can that really be justified by that harmful action, which is, I think, in most situations in the form of verbal speech, right? That's the situation that most of us will find, right? So like this, then we ask ourselves, and if so, if that harmful action can be justified, or that can be used as a valid reasoning to hold onto our anger towards them, then in a way that is not true. Why? Because that harmful action has already ceased to exist. It doesn't exist anymore. That was spoken, whatever words, negative words were spoken, that has ceased to exist. Yet, our holding on to, our internalizing of that anger, is very much present, right? So then what is the link there? There is no link. If you think about it in a logical way, there is no link there, right? So like this, then, we have to think from different angles in order to overcome our suppressed anger, in order to overcome our internalizing an external action. If we can do this, then it makes it. I think it would make it much easier practicing compassion with others, especially in having a healthy relationship. It could be between family members, between friends, between co-workers, and so forth. And with these methods, with this methodology, then I think this helps in overcoming many of the issues that where putting into practice our compassion is simply not possible, right? It would really eradicate those situations where cultivating compassion towards a specific person who is the aggressor in this case is not simply possible. So we have to think in this manner to overcome that barrier, right? So like this. When we feel hurt by someone, then think how kind this person is. Because it is due to the kindness of this person that I have the opportunity to practice patience. Right? It is due to the kindness of this person that I now have the chance to practice the perfection of patience. It gives me an opportunity to perfect my practice of being patient. Yeah? This is how we have to view our circumstance. It is true that when we are put in this kind of a situation, we just cannot change it like that. We just cannot change it. That is simply not possible. To make that situation very good, it would require the effort of two persons, right? The other person and yourself. So if the other person is not in line, if the other person is not willing to take the what we call something like the reasonable path, is not willing to think or act not act reasonably, then the impetus is for us to take actions. We can change how the other person's harmful words, how it affects us, is entirely in our hands, right? The harmful actions themselves are, of course, not in our hands. We cannot control that. But how we receive it, how we receive that harmful intention is really in our hands. So all it takes is really we have to learn how to view that action, that situation, and instead of seeing it as completely negative, instead of saying that I got hurt and then holding on to that hurt, instead just see the kindness of that person for presenting you with this wonderful opportunity to practice the Dharma, to practice one of the 6 perfections, right? So if we learn to view, if we learn to think, if we learn to react in this way, then no outer forces can really disturb our minds, right? In this way, then we are able to bring calmness in our minds. In this way, we are able to bring peace into our minds. In this way, we are able to gain control of our minds, right? So, I know that I have been talking maybe too long on these gloomy situations, but I felt that there is a need to do so, because if we are able to face the gloomy situations, then I think we are making improvements in our practice. If we are able to face the difficult situations, the difficulties, the challenges that that we face in our everyday life, then learning how to face those challenges can only be good, So we have to bring that in our practice of upholding a healthy relationship with other sentient beings, in generating and cultivating compassion towards others. This is such an important part of that, It is a very important part of bringing our bodhicitta practice to life, right? It's really about, it is, I feel, a practical way of implementing our concepts of how to practice compassion. So, like that. Okay, and I think there was a question about why there are two mantras for a single deity. So yesterday, in the case of yesterday's, then the Vajrapani, there are two mantras. So the other mantra is Om Benza Pane Hum, right? Om Benza Pane Hum. And then the yesterday one was Om Nilam Bara Dara Benza Pane Ranzapada Ye Soha, right? So these differences, they come, Nilam Bara, it's referring to the color, the blue color, right? So when we have these extra words, they may be referring to the color, or maybe adding more like honorifics, something like this, right? So here Ranza is king, right? So these are some minor differences. But of course, the deity is the same, right? So Benzapani or Vajrapani. In the Sanskrit, if we say it in a very proper Sanskrit, then it is pronounced Vajrapani. But we Tibetans, we have always pronounced it as Benzapani. And we Tibetans are quite proud of that, So whenever there's this word, which is actually pronounced Vajrapani, we insist on Benzapani, We insist on Benza. Whenever there's this word Vajra, we always pronounce it as Benza, right? So I think this has to do maybe a bit with identity in one way, but on the other hand, then I think it also has to do with, in a way, honoring our teachers, honoring our gurus, because our gurus have, when I received it, then my guru said Benzapani, right? So then I follow likewise and then say Benzapani, right? But of course, yes, the actual, to say it in a very, to get the pronunciation correctly, then definitely Vajra is Vajra. Vajra should not be pronounced as Benza, but keeping these other aspects in mind, then I think it is okay to also pronounce it as Benza. There are no, as long as we have the meaning, as long as we know what Benza refers to, then I think we are good, we are good, right? I'm sure you have heard of this story. There was one person, I don't remember which deity it was, but he was anyhow reciting the mantra of this deity, but the pronunciation was not was incorrect, right? And after receiving this and then pronouncing it for over many years, then gradually he would have something like dreams and visions of the deity, right? But then one day he met someone, and then this person corrected him on the pronunciation, and then he had some doubts. So one doubt leads to another, and so forth. And later, even when he pronounced it correctly, then those visions were no more. So he had these doubts, and then these doubts led to other doubts, and then he kind of lost his faith, and then these visions, they stopped happening, right? So you see, so therefore then pronunciation, if he can pronounce it correctly, that's good, but then in keeping with something like the tradition and honoring the teachers, then sometimes we say this is not so important, but one has to, understand the meaning, right? Then that is fine. And also the faith, especially in the Tantra, having faith in the meaning of the mantra, in the deity, then this has a very important place, right? Has a very important place. Yeah. And also, Maitreya and then the disciple Asanga. This, I think, the Chinese Buddhism, Chinese Mahayana tradition is very much connected with the works of Maitreya and Asanga, which is, I think, the Chinese Mahayana emphasizes the Yogacara or Chittamatra, mind-only tradition, and also the Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature. So like this, then there is this connection. Okay, so then I think I will do the oral transmission of the Maitreya mantra.
接下来呢，仁波切要口传这个弥勒佛的心咒。
So then please repeat.
请跟着念。
Om Mem Maitreya Soha. Om Mem Maitreya Soha. Om Mem Maitreya Soha. Okay, so then this completes the transmission of the mantra. And yesterday, the Vajrapani permission blessing, this I have had the good fortune of receiving it from the late Kyabje Lati Rinpoche, and then Thakpa Rinpoche, and then the Maitreya mantra. Then this I've received from again Kyabje Lati Rinpoche. So this is the lineage. Okay, so then with this, then this concludes today's event.
掌声感恩仁波切。